Hi, folks. This is Lee W. Mowen, the host of the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast. I've been hosting my podcast on Anchor for some time now, and let me tell you why it's the easiest way to make a podcast. When you host with Anchor, you have creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your computer or phone. Anchor then distributes your podcast for you so others can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more platforms. You can even make some money with your podcast with no minimum listenership required. And best of all, it's 100% free. It truly is the one-stop shop for those looking to start a podcast. To start, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Anchor.
Day 3 of Streak Week on the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast. And in a minute, you will hear JT Szabo on episode 158. For those of you that are just coming onto this podcast, this is Streak Week, where from Sunday, June 14th until the 21st, there will be a new episode each and every day. 8 new episodes, 8 great interviews. Now, those of you that might have podcasts or listen to a lot of podcasts, you might be asking yourself, why would you do something like this when you just sit on the interviews? And that's a very good question, but I don't like just sitting on interviews. I want to release them as quick as I can, and I got a little overzealous with my free time this weekend, but that's okay. You know why? Because it's Streak Week, and there are great interviews, such as this one with JT Szabo. But first, a couple of quick words from the new network affiliate in 12-Ounce Sports.
Hey folks, this is Lee W. Mowen of the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast, and I'm here to talk to you about MyBookie. Since 2014, it's the place where you can bet on anything, anywhere, anytime. Get up to $1,000 on your first deposit bonus. Use the promo code 12OZSports. As well as sports betting, you can play some casino games, take in some live odds in Madden 20 and NBA 2K20, and even bet with Bitcoin. Visit mybookie.ag and use that promo code 12OZSports. That's 12OZSports. MyBookie, the industry's most rewarding loyalty program.
12-Ounce Sports. Visit us at 12ouncesportsradio.com. It's episode 158 of the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast. Our special guest is JT Szabo, the former broadcasting voice of the Dayton Bombers and Dayton Gems, and currently an assistant coach with the Troy Trojans Hockey team. We're talking plenty of local hockey and sports, JT's career and other businesses, and more on episode 158. Welcome to the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast with Lee W. Mowen. This is a weekly podcast covering all sports in Cincinnati and Dayton, Ohio. From Lima to the Ohio River and northern Kentucky, from eastern Indiana to Madison County and all points in between, this is your source of local Cincinnati and Dayton, Ohio sports. Visit the leewmowen.com/podcasts to find your favorite podcasting platform. Music created with the Splash app. Time for another episode with your host, Lee W. Mowen. And on the phone right now is JT Szabo calling from Troy. JT, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well, Lee. Hope everybody is doing well out there. Despite all of the craziness the last couple of weeks, I know I'm certainly ready to get out from the quarantine and get back to some regular life, I think.
Absolutely. So let's begin. JT, where are you from?
Well, I'm from Troy. I was born here in Troy, raised mostly in Troy. I split my childhood between two hometowns, Troy, Ohio, and London, Ontario, Canada. And, you know, coming back here, I think this is the third time that I wanted to come back to Troy and started raise a family and put down roots here in town, and I can't really think of anywhere else that I would want to be.
So you grew up in Troy and also London, Ontario, Canada. But when did you fall in love with the sport of hockey?
Oh, gee. Yeah, there. I like how you go right into it. Eh? It's been an interesting kind of a start. I remember, when I was 5 or 6, telling everyone, "Oh, I don't want anything to do with hockey. I don't want to play hockey. I don't want to do that." And then, it ends up being, a career at one point and a really highlight on my life. But no, it's a family business, and that was really what the drive was for me. As I got older, as I started to kind of figure out, okay, what am I going to do with myself? I realized that, that sport is really something that holds a lot of my family together. My father is from Hamilton, Ontario. Okay. Actually grew up in Grimsby, Ontario, which is a small town about the size of Troy, ironically, that's right on Lake Ontario between Niagara Falls and Hamilton. And I remember as a kid going to my grandparents' house, Nana and Papa, in Grimsby, and they had a beautiful house that was maybe 500 feet from the water on Lake Ontario. And I knew that we were at Nana and Papa's house, even when I was very young, because I could see across the lake on a clear day, and I could see the tower, and I could see Skydome in Toronto, clear across the lake. And it's one of the earliest memories that I have personally. So I just couldn't escape it, Lee. I couldn't get away from hockey. There wasn't anything that I could have done. My dad played professional hockey for over 10 years. My uncle was a professional hockey player. There's that. There's something in the blood that really drove me to the sport. So that, there's a lot of things working against me there when I would say, I don't want to be a hockey player. I don't want to do that. That just wasn't gonna be the case,
Can you remember when it switched over from I don't want anything to do with hockey to hockey?
I don't think there was any one real genesis point for me personally. Growing up, I'd watch Hockey Night in Canada with my dad, and we'd go downstairs and we'd play knee hockey in the basement. And the house rule was whoever won the knee hockey game down in the basement got to make milkshakes before Don Cherry came on. That was always our big thing. And miraculously, my dad always fell apart there at the end of our games and let me score the game winner. So I was pretty happy about that. No, for me, I can still distinctively remember my first skating lesson at Carling Arena in London, screaming my head off, absolutely just bloody murder. My dad had found some terribly old CCM metal skates with the metal runners, the red and white candy cane shoelaces from a Play It Again Sports. And this is probably 1990, 91 maybe at the time. Did my first skating lesson, swore I never wanted to do it again, and ended up, really starting to take a liking to it. Got into a youth hockey program in London briefly before we moved to Troy. But it was just one of those gradual, is just part of life, It was a language that our family spoke. It was just something that, my very first memory as a kid is of watching my dad play professional hockey. And I was maybe 6 months old, maybe. And I'm really blessed that I have some of these memories. But yes, the very first thing I remember is seeing my dad play professional hockey, sitting on my mom's lap. And just kind of going from there. It was pretty cool looking back on it.
At what point did you decide that you wanted to be a hockey broadcaster?
Yeah, well, you're kind of hitting all the tough questions here tonight. That was really that was such a tough thing for me because I was never a great hockey player, and I knew it. I wasn't the best skater. I wasn't the hardest shot. And my heart just never was fully there to sit and shoot 100 pucks at a net every night. I had other goals, other ambitions. Hockey was just something that I really enjoyed. And I enjoyed watching it as much as I did playing it, which is interesting. As far as, growing up, I played on some house league teams, some travel teams. I would get frustrated easily, especially as the talent gap got a little higher. So, my last year of Bantam, I led the league in penalty minutes. And my very next season was my first season playing varsity high school, and I think I got two minutes in the box. So it was a definite, role changer when I was looking at my playing career. But growing up, I always had a passion for stuff outside of maybe just playing. I did a lot of refereeing for a while growing up as a kid and made some pretty good money at it. And that was going to be really a focus of mine for a long time. That I knew I wanted to stay in hockey. I realized that was going to be the path for me to try and figure out where I could go with it. And I also knew that it wasn't going to be as a player. So pretty early on, I had a good idea that maybe we should start looking at some other things that we could do to stay in the game, stay relevant, stay active, and have just as much, if not more, fun with. And at that point, officiating became a real passion of mine. And I got to a point where I was getting pretty successful, getting pretty high up, working on my skating, making, like I said, some pretty decent coin for, a kid in junior high and then in high school, to the point where my senior year of high school, I had already stopped playing, and I had already started dabbling in some of the technical side, media arts. I was the theater AV geek in high school that would run the soundboard for all of the high school plays and productions, and so that was me. I volunteered at the local access station producing local TV shows that were just mind-bogglingly amazing looking back on. So that really was kind of my side of how can I take this newfound passion for media, broadcast, technology, being in front of a camera eventually, and merge it with my love of hockey. And it came in, I believe it was my senior year of high school, where I had an opportunity to, and a choice really. I had a choice between pursuing officiating as a career and pursuing broadcasting as a career, and it came together almost at the same time, which is so rare. And I'm so blessed and fortunate now looking back on how things played out. I had an opportunity to work for a junior A club, a junior A team in their media and be their announcer essentially. I had also an opportunity and a personal invitation from Scott Brandt, who at the time was the head of the USA Hockey official development program. A personalized invitation from Scott Brandt to attend training camp for the ODP officials. And those are the USA Hockey officials coming up through the ranks that they identify, hey, these are guys that we're going to work with and try and move them up. Kind of like the junior equivalent of an official. And I had an opportunity to go to training camp. And ultimately what would have happened is they would have put me in the North American League and maybe even the United States League to work as a linesman. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, I also had an opportunity on the media side. And so it was really, for a 17-year-old kid, such an interesting time to make that choice. And that ultimately I chose media. and I didn't attend training camp with the ODP. I ended up doing I refereed one game in the North American Hockey League. And you love stories, and you love how the hockey world is so interconnected, and it's such a small world that the two coaches of the one game in the North American Hockey League I did ended up being Mark Frankenfeld, now the commissioner of the North American Hockey League, that really personally in the last 10 years has taken junior hockey in the United States with USA Hockey to a whole nother level. He was on one bench, and on the other bench, screaming at me when I missed an offsides, was John Cooper, now the head coach of the Tampa Bay Lightning. And it was such a surreal moment looking back on that, without even realizing who was on the ice at that time. It was the USA Hockey under-18 national team that was in town that I ended up refereeing. Phil Kessel was on the ice that night when he was with the national team. So it's amazing how small the world is when you talk hockey. And I'm just very fortunate to be such a small part of that, that, when I look back on it, it was an incredible opportunity that I had. That, when you go media and broadcasting, it comes full circle. As a broadcaster in the East Coast League, there were a handful of guys that were on the ice that North American League game I refereed that ended up being on teams that I would broadcast for. And we would have that commonality, and we kind of reminisce about those. And so it's been a lot of fun, and it's taken me places that, playing knee hockey on the floor in London, you'd never really imagine.
Just imagine if you followed the officiating path anymore, then you wouldn't have been my boss in Troy with the Bruins.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. And it's funny to think. I do think that I made the right decision all those years ago. I think becoming a professional hockey broadcaster was the right call. I think that was what, in a lot of regards, that's the contribution that I could make to the game at that time. And I had a ton of fun with it, and including, working with you as a fresh out of college. You were still in college at the time, I think. You were still at Wright State, were you not?
Yeah, that would have been my very last quarter, so I was splitting time with the Bruins and also the college radio station. So
that's right. Yes.
That's how we met, actually.
Lots of good memories, and I remember, it's a funny story. I remember the very first time I ever heard your name, and it was sitting in the studio. I was doing an interview like this with WWSU, and I think it was 2007. Okay. 2007, 2008, I was sitting with Jeremy Lance, who at the time was the sports director there. And he brought up that the station had been doing some of the Raiders hockey games and just casually name-dropped your name. And that kind of stuck out in my mind because I like to meet other hockey announcers, and, if I can help mentor and give advice to guys and gals coming up through the ranks with whatever experience that I have. I certainly like to do that. But yeah, it was Wright State there in the Student Union Hall. It was after a Bombers game in 07. Occasionally I'd go there after a game and just kind of rep the team, so to speak, do some PR work there on Wright State's campus since we played at Nutter Center. So like I said, it's a small world, Lee. You're even included in that.
I know. How crazy is it? I mean, with other sports, it could seem like a small world, but hockey is so intertwined. You mentioned Scott Brand. He was the GM of the Carolina Thunderbirds, especially when they won the FHL Cup a couple years back. I think he's with the Columbus River Dragons now, something like that.
I couldn't tell you. I haven't really followed that whole circuit. It's difficult for me to figure out what day it is here lately.
I
with the COVID going on, and with having kids at home now and a little one, we've been pretty cautious throughout this whole thing, just making sure that we don't want to let the little guys get sick, and so I haven't been out much. So I'm still not sure what day it is today either, and at some point I'm sure somebody will remind me as we get back to normal.
Well, the only reason why I know days are it's my interviews for my podcast, and I keep them in track. If I don't, then I forget. Like, oh yeah, you were supposed to be interviewed. Like, oops, sorry. So, but can I tell you a story about broadcasting Raider hockey?
Oh, absolutely.
So there was a time where I was pretty rough, and I wasn't a very good hockey broadcaster. So much as Gary Dickstein had to get me a copy of Hockey Rules. Like, yeah, I
Oh, Gary Dickstein. That's a name I haven't heard in a while.
Yeah, he's not at Wright State anymore. He's working Dayton City schools, I think.
Well, he's got a bit of an in there.
Yeah, I mean, I always like seeing him at Wright State homecoming, just because I announced the games there, but. Yeah, I wasn't very good at hockey broadcasting. I slowly got better at it, and I like to think nowadays I'm okay, so...
Well, everybody starts somewhere, and this is something I tell a lot of people, and especially people that didn't grow up with the game of hockey.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people in our area, don't really get to experience it until they're older, and I think that's a shame, and that's something that personally I'd like to address at some point. But for somebody that's not used to the game to come into it, it's such a challenge. It's so unlike calling any other sport.
Absolutely.
And I've done enough other sports to know that there's nothing like calling a fast, high tempo, high energy hockey game. Baseball's completely different. It's all about filling dead air. Football, you're working in 8-second spurts. It's basically the broadcast equivalent of a rodeo. Here's the snap, hold on. Oh, there's 5 seconds and we're off. Let's fill 3.5 minutes of replay. Which has its own challenges, certainly. Mm-hmm. Basketball, probably the closest that I've done to hockey, where it's a pretty consistent flow, but it's a lot more repetitive. There's only a handful of positions, handoffs. It's a pretty set sport. It really is when you look at it. There's only a handful of things that each position can do that over the course of 2.5 hours, trying to make it seem like all of these things are happening can be a bit of a challenge as well to do basketball. And probably the best that I've heard, and someone that I've really looked up to that I've been able to work with, is Chris Collins. You want to talk about that Wright State connection? I absolutely love tuning in and listening to Chris call a Raiders game, and it's just his delivery of the basketball tempo reminds me so much of the cadence of a hockey announcer. And just the flow, it's even, it's keel, but still has enough bombastic emotion in there to convey a big hit or a slam dunk or a play that really gets excited, that not everybody has. And certainly I think Chris does a fantastic job. And I know he's been on your show before. He's a great person off the court. So, I'm just happy to be in such good company here on this podcast, Lee.
He's the first one I got to interview during the quarantine when I finally decided, why am I not interviewing people? I have plenty of time. So, but yeah, Chris, all class, and definitely, I never thought about it, but you're right. He's got a nice rhythm and flow when he calls a game, and yeah. I never
Tell him I said that. He'll get a kick out of that. I haven't talked to Chris since I left WHIO, so he'll get a real kick out of that. But I mean it. It's the delivery. It's so professional, and it's so similar to how we try and call a hockey game, where there's a flow, there's a rhythm to it. It's almost musical if you do it correctly.
Absolutely. Calling a hockey game is, I think, one of the toughest sports to get right. And if you get hockey right, then you could broadcast just about anything.
There's a lot of room for mistakes, especially on radio. There's, but it is challenging. It is, and I think that's why I enjoy the sport as much as I do as a broadcaster, because A, every game is completely different. B, there's mistakes made at every level that makes it more exhilarating. And being able to, call fights like a ring announcer 1 second and, talk about the Dayton Bombers the kids club, right after that is something that you can only get in hockey. So I suppose that's unique too for people that enjoy that sort of thing.
Hey, there was a fight. How about this kids club?
Yeah, that's a true story, by the way. That was a Bombers game. I remember it was 07-08 season, and I couldn't remember where we were, but I'm pretty sure we were on the road at that time. And our games at the time were on 980 AM WONE, and I think Schlemmer was still there too.
Yep.
I think that's when he was still there. So we were on ONE, and we were on the road somewhere, and our goon at the time was Britt Doherty, number 3, and he was a good old Canadian boy, as Don Cherry would say, and his role was to fight. And he embraced that completely, and he was exactly what you would think a role player at the AA level would be. And he was also the funniest guy off the ice too. He was just so full of personality at the time. But I remember he would fight, and he would be the guy that would have the big production. We're gonna square up after the face-off, and I'm going to roll up the sleeves, and I'm going to make a big show of taking the bucket off and, the gloves down, and we're going to duke it out. And so you would see the fight developing well before. And broadcasting for me, I spend almost as much time looking away from the puck as I do with the puck, because I understand where the puck's going, how the breakouts are going, because I'm watching morning skate, I'm watching practice, I know how they're breaking out. So I'm watching what's going on, who's coming on the ice. I'm trying to keep up with line combinations if I can. Not every broadcast position allows you a good vantage point for that, at least in the minors. So I'm watching all these things. So I see Britt come out. And I think it was a retaliation for an earlier no call or something like that, just policing the game business. And he comes out, and so I call the fight. And how I always like to call it is I'd give the play-by-play of the fight. The people at home, and at that time we were streaming on, I think, Team Line through the internet provider in 07. So, Doherty takes the bucket out. He's going to give it a right hook to the left side on the cheek. They link back up, grabs the sweater, pulls it back up, couldn't get it in time, gives him a right on left, now a second right into the body. And they go down, right? So the linesmen are breaking them up, and I realized up on the clock, and I looked down at my sheet that, we stopped exactly on a media timeout. And to my disbelief, they blew the horn, which is protocol to let everyone know we're going to take a timeout. Red light came on at the penalty box that indicates a media timeout at the time. So I just go right from, he's down! Doherty wins the fight for the Bombers! And we're going to step aside, 4:23 to go. Bombers ahead 3-0. We're going to listen to the Dayton Bombers Kids Club coming up after this break. And it goes from one extreme completely to the other. And it's just, you just kind of shake your head and give it a good chuckle as you take a drink of water, and you just realize that, this is a great job.
So 2 things real quick. First one is more of a general question in hockey. Do you think the enforcer role has gone away or disappeared?
At what level? And that's really the big question for me. The game at the highest level of the National Hockey League is so fast. It is so fast, and the tempo is so high that they've basically taken it out itself. At least the role of the enforcer. It's not the 70s. It's not, the Flyers are, gooning everybody up because they're running traps. The game is so much faster. The guys have to be able to keep up, or they're not cutting rosters. So guys that fight, I think most hockey players that reach a higher level have had a couple scraps that can hold their own, but you're not seeing the big goons anymore, and that's the reason for it. So they can put whatever they want in the rule book, at least in the National Hockey League, about enforcers and third man in, and instigator, which is the dumbest rule I've ever heard.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter anymore because the game has left it behind.
Yeah.
Now, with that said, there is a difference, at least in my mind, between the National Hockey League and the minor leagues. And the minor leagues are there predominantly as entertainment for whatever town happens to support it. That's its business. A lot of players come up through the minors, and they're trying to work their way up, and that's really on the parent club now that is making roster decisions for the minor league clubs, whereas the minor league clubs are selling tickets, and so there's a disconnect there.
And the other thing is, this is going to sound awful, but one thing that I miss about broadcasting high school hockey are the fights, just because there's something about a fight that just, feels so right in the sport.
Well, I maybe I'll segue that into 3 parts. I was a proponent of fighting at all levels of hockey for a very long time, and I felt it was a part of the game, and I still do to a certain level. I don't think that the extracurricular fighting, the roughhousing, the hits after the whistle, just stuff like that has any place in interscholastic sports of any kind.
Yeah.
And it's a shame that what I've seen the last couple of years is high school hockey, at least in the Dayton, Cincinnati area, has gone from, a varsity sport in a lot of areas to more and more of a travel hockey mentality has started to creep in. And I've watched that firsthand last year when I came back into high school hockey after a pretty lengthy absence, that there is a difference, and there is more of a scrappy, less refined feel to it now that I think some people are starting to kind of counter and say, no, this is, these are student athletes. This is, you need to think of this more as, college hockey light versus, East Coast League light. And so it's a mentality change. And I think it's just, I could go on for hours about the vacuum that was left after the Gems folded, and professional hockey left Dayton after the Bombers folded, even for a lot of people. That not having professional hockey in the market for 10 years is really what that has done to the sport at the amateur level, that the kids don't have, an easy access to watch high level professional hockey and to emulate those skill sets, and to see that, I think really makes a difference.
I understand that, and I'm not saying high school needs to have fighting in it. I'm not saying that at all.
But you just miss calling fights. See, that's the thing. You need to find somewhere that you can call some fights. I got a couple guys in Springfield that play in the Springfield Men's League that would love to put on a couple Donnybrooks for you on a Sunday night. And I know a couple of guys in Springfield, a couple guys here in Troy actually would probably stage a good fight for you. The girlfriends would be in the stands watching, so they'd get something out of it.
Tell them to come on down to Centerville, and we'll make that a date. So I'm glad you understood what I was getting at there.
Oh, I do. It's all in good fun.
Yeah. So let's talk about your tenure with the Dayton Bombers and Dayton Gems. How did you wind up with the ECHL squad?
It was persistence more than anything, I think. It picks right up with, when we were talking about my early career. I realized that's what I wanted to do. I spent 3 or 4 years with the local access channel doing high school hockey.
What were some of your favorite games and venues you got to see with the Bombers?
Oh, hands down, the best experience for me, and there's a handful of them. When I started with the Bombers, it was 2005. And at the time I was 19, so I was the youngest broadcaster in professional hockey. Wow. Which is incredible to think about. And I'm incredibly thankful for the opportunity to do that. I had been broadcasting local high school hockey here in Troy for a handful of years, and I was practicing my craft and what I didn't want to do to be a hockey player, I was more than willing to do to be a hockey broadcaster. And I realized that at that time, where I was I was calling video games. I had an old PS2 with NHL 98, and I would put it in, and as I played, or even I remember sometimes I would do autoplay, and I would call the game as if I was a broadcaster. And just those practicing moments gave me the opportunity so that when I did finally find a way in, I was prepared. And that was really the biggest thing that I really worked towards personally and professionally. So I had been calling some high school hockey games. We had been doing radio at that point, some TV. We're getting, 5,000-6,000 streams online for a high school hockey game, which in 2005 is incredible, right?
Absolutely.
And just doing all of this, and we've got multi-camera productions, and we've got graphics, and I'm learning sales at that point, selling some advertising for it. I'm going to a community college, during the day. I'm doing this, really focusing that this is what I wanted to do at that point. That, I had met the broadcaster of the Bombers. They came to Hobart in 2004 to play a game, their first game at Hobart. When they were starting to have some issues with Wright State. They played a game there. I met up with their broadcaster. Him and I chatted. And that summer is when Costa Papista and Don McAdam bought the team. And I remember meeting both of them. I went to the very first, meet and greet. I introduced myself. I said, I'd love to be a part of the organization. I'd be willing to do pretty much anything just to sit in the booth with a headset on. And I was able to meet the broadcaster that was coming in. David Miller was a veteran broadcaster. He had worked in Buffalo in the National Hockey League. He was extremely experienced in minor league hockey. He came from Cleveland to the American Hockey League to come to Dayton because he was a veteran voice. And so I got to team up with him. And that was an amazing experience for me. To be able to sit with him and actually see how a professional works. because it's one thing to try and sort of figure it out yourself. You're calling some local high school games on a local station. You develop your own habits and your own prep ways. And then to see a guy that's been doing it professionally for almost 30 years is a completely different experience. The things that you learn and why you do certain things and how to communicate with a station and how to fit your breaks in and really learn how to be a professional is so important to me that there's no school, no class, no education, no degree could have provided me the useful practical information that I got that first season with the Bombers. And it went so much further than the booth. Learned that the business also, if you wanted to be a broadcaster in professional hockey, you have to be a PR guy. Here's how you write a press release. You also are the guy that has to make the stat packet. And back then, that was before League Stat and Point Streak and all of these other things. I remember sitting in front of the computer at 7 a.m. on game day with David Miller in his office, and him and I would be in front of an Excel spreadsheet typing in stats from the last game. And that's how we built the stat sheet the first year. It's amazing, the experience that you get if you just ask. And that's the biggest advice I give to a lot of people coming up. You know, what can I do to become a broadcaster? What can I do to get these jobs? How did you, get in there? Well, first I asked, I said, Costa, this is what I want to do. Can I just kind of come? And I was just in it for a press credential, a hot dog, and a pop. Honestly, I think that was my intern salary. I got to come to a hockey game, sit and watch as much hockey as I could. I got a pop and whatever media food there, and I got to learn how to do what I wanted to do. So that was huge. And then the big break, as they say, came the day before Christmas in 2005. David Miller left the organization. They didn't have a broadcaster, and they were hitting the road on the bus in less than 20 hours.
So they need to find someone, and hey.
So, I was in Cincinnati at the old Cincinnati Gardens calling a Troy High School versus Moeller game. And that was always a big rivalry hockey game. So I'm at the Gardens. I'm up in the booth calling the game, and I get a phone call between periods, and it's Costa. And he says, "Hey, JT, we got some things going on. David had to leave, and we were hoping you could come and meet with us tomorrow morning, and we'll talk then." And I'm thinking, well, what's this about? And sure enough, I went there that morning, and they said, we know you're young, we know you're inexperienced, you've done a great job for us, we want you to take over for a bit. They made it clear that it wasn't going to be a full-time opportunity just yet. I was still in school, and that was important, but it was an opportunity to really kind of get my beak wet a little bit into that. That was it was a surreal experience for me to travel to Wheeling and do my first professional hockey game on Boxing Day in 2005.
That's a really cool story, and I bet you have a lot of fond memories in Wheeling, West Virginia.
Oh, Wheeling was an interesting town. That was, buddy. That was such a crazy night for me. I'm a nervous wreck. I'm on the road. I'm trying to set this equipment up because I knew how to use the equipment, but when it's just you and you're in the booth and all of this stuff's going on, your parents are listening, and this is a big deal. So there's a bit of nerves going on there. And then the old goal horn at West Banco Arena went off before pregame, and I may have wet myself a little bit there. I didn't realize how loud those things get. Any Bombers fans there that have traveled to West Banco know exactly what I'm talking about. So that kind of took my mind off of it a little bit. And fortunately, the relationships you make at that level are so key and so critical. And the guys that work, with the teams when you're traveling on the road can make your life easier, or they can make them a lot harder. And I'm so fortunate that in Wheeling at the time, their broadcaster and PR guy was just the best I've ever met. And we've sort of kept in touch a little bit over through the years, and he helped get my nerves and my bearings in order that first night. And it's such a small world. It was Brendan Burke at the time, and a lot of people now know him as the voice of the NHL on NBC Sports Network, and he's the TV play-by-play announcer of the New York Islanders. And he's, we kind of had that shared commonality. He was just a year or two into it. I was just getting into it, and the people that you meet, you never know, where it's going to lead from there.
And you never know what's next for anyone as well. I mean, also, can I share a story that's very similar to the Wheeling goal horn sound?
Oh, that was amazing. I still have flashbacks of that horn going off.
I have all those Wheeling flashbacks. So in high school hockey, a lot of the venues don't have their own goal horns, or if they do, it's played off an iPad. So I got to call Moeller St. X down at where the Cyclones play, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I forgot there's goal horns. So the first time it goes off, it's like, oh, it was great. But I love that place. I mean, yeah, it might need a renovation, but still, that's a nice barn for hockey.
Oh no, there's a lot of history in that building. That was one of my favorite places to go. Honestly, there are a handful of buildings that I really loved going to. I loved going to Cincinnati. It is really one of the reasons why I became a broadcaster. You want to talk stories?
Yeah.
I mean, we're just going to turn this into a full-on hot stove league here now, I think. But no, it was exactly what we talked about earlier. Hockey's in my blood, and it's such a small world. My dad, he played for the Stingers in Cincinnati for, a hot minute as a goaltender in the WHA. That was kind of one direction that he took, and he got called up and spent some time in Cincinnati, which is, I mean, that's amazing, honestly. Yeah. Just the odds of that, and a testament to, his perseverance during his career. So he played in that building, and that's one of a handful of arenas that I was able to work in that I grew up hearing stories from my dad about, stories of going to Cincinnati and staying there and playing in that building, what it was like then. And now, here I am, I'm in the same building, working, not quite at the same level of league as the WHA was, but it's still really cool to kind of sit there. And I took lots of moments to myself just in commercial breaks or before the game where I would just kind of look around and say, this is what it was for. This is what I do. But so, yeah, Cincinnati always had a place in my heart. When I was really young, before I decided I wanted to be a broadcaster, when I was still trying to figure out where I was going with it, my dad would go down to Cincinnati, and he would work with John Weideman as a color analyst on WSAI, and then later 1360 Homer when the Cyclones were in the IHL. Back in the old I days. So we're talking 96, 97, 98. So right after they had purchased the Coliseum and renovated it in 97. So Dad was going down to Cyclones games fairly regular as a fill-in color guy on the Cyclones broadcasts. And so, occasionally I would get to tag along if I did my homework and stayed out of trouble. And I remember sitting up in the press box there at the Crown, and then eventually First Star Center at the time, between John Weideman, who was the play-by-play guy of the Cyclones at the time, and my dad. And I would put a headset on. John would always have a third headset for me, and I'd listen to the broadcast. And I was just absolutely taken aback at how incredibly talented he was, and how I could close my eyes. Even though I'm in the building, I could close my eyes, I could hear him, and I could see what was happening in my mind. And I knew at that instant that's what I wanted to do. And that's what I eventually started to practice emulating. My style as a broadcaster is very intentionally similar to John Weideman, who he's now the radio play-by-play announcer for the Chicago Blackhawks. And he's been in Chicago for about 10 years. Hands down, the best hockey announcer there is. No question. And being able to be right there, listening to him call games at a high level, he was the one that taught how to call a fight, call it like a prize fight, give people a description of what's going on. Don't just say fight. Really quick, machine gun, smooth, crisp delivery. And all it cost me was every intermission I had to go down into the bowels of the arena and get him 1 cup of ice that then he would soothe his throat with after calling a period. And I just got a kick out of it. And just thinking back, all of these opportunities, it's just really surreal.
It's a really cool story. And also, before we continue on, you mentioned your dad several times. Great guy. And I'm happy to get to see him when Centerville gets to play the Trojans. So.
Yeah, he always gets a kick out of it, too. I saw on Facebook he wished you a happy birthday. I caught that a day late. I apologize for that.
Oh, that's fine.
Oh, no, but he always speaks highly of you, and we loved having you a part of the organization. And, I think what you've done, not just for hockey, but for, sports and amateur sports here in Dayton has been phenomenal. And we're behind you every step of the way, Lee.
I appreciate that, and there's a lot of love for the Szabo family in my heart. So now, you were the voice of the Bombers, and then the Bombers folded up shop eventually, and in came the Dayton Gems 2.0, which were part of the IHL 2.0 and the Central Hockey League, right? CHL?
Yes. So they started in 2009 as an expansion club of the International Hockey League, which was essentially a rebranding of the old United Hockey League. What had happened is the owner of the Fort Wayne Comets had just purchased outright all of the trademarks and names and all the branding, essentially, of the old International Hockey League that folded in 2001, and basically just rebranded their league. And that's kind of what it was at the time. They needed some teams to play. They were financing basically their own outfit. I guess they, from what I understand, had some issues with some of the other leagues that were in existence. Thought they could go in alone, and that's what they did. And they made a fairly decent run at it. Unfortunately, they needed towns and they needed teams. And when the Bombers folded, that opened up Dayton as a potential market for their club with an existing built-in fan base. I mean, at the end, the Bombers were averaging just under 3,000 at the Nutter Center. By single A standards, at the time, that's essentially what the United League was. 3,000 would be an excellent crowd. So it was a definite business decision. The individuals that they found to operate the team in Dayton, however, I think that's where they got into a bit of trouble. And it was it was not a good situation, I don't feel, with how it was started, to the point where the second season is when that league decided, well, maybe we can't do it by ourselves, and they ended up being absorbed by the Central Hockey League. At that time, then the new ownership came in as well. And I can't say enough for what Kathy Rupp did. There aren't a lot of people that realize how much, not only sweat equity, sleepless nights, and how much money was put into trying to save hockey in Dayton. Trying to grow the sport of hockey in Dayton. And I just don't think Kathy gets enough accolades, which is, knowing Kathy, I'm pretty sure that's how she likes it. But it's important to know how hard she tried to save hockey and how much it meant to her, with her husband, Pat being such a legendary gem, 1960 gold medal winner for the Olympic team, just everything that you would look at and be inspired by. It was a really valiant effort, but I think ultimately there were some fatal flaws, and not having a suitable building, I think was the big one.
It's a shame too. I have a lot of fond memories with the Gems 2.0 because that was that my first or second year as sports director. We had a couple deals where we make a couple radio ads and we gave away free Gems tickets. So that was always cool to make in the production studio. So I always liked doing that for the Gems 2.0. And when they got the black jerseys as well, when they had the fans vote on those, I was so happy because that's the one I picked. So.
I mean, it wasn't for lack of trying. We weren't a big office, but there was certainly no lack of effort there trying to do what we could. I know the idea at the time. I think we were thinking this was 11-12 season, where we'd have a giveaway every night. Something every night. And we had some really fun ones. I'm thinking, I don't know how many ones kind of stuck, but we had some good ideas. PR director of a minor league hockey team, that could either be a pretty easy, fun job, or it can be stressful at times. And they kind of threw me in after leaving the Troy Bruins when the league disbanded. I came on board with the Gems as the PR director and then the broadcaster that last season. And one of the very first things I had to do was explain why the team wasn't being sued by Steve Bartman, when our president at the time was a bit of a Cubbies fan and thought it would be a gas, I guess, to have a Steve Bartman night for our preseason game where we would give free admission to anybody dressed as the famous Cubs foil, for sports fans that know exactly who Steve Bartman is. It also turns out that the man does not like being, shared publicly like that and kind of mocked in a certain way. So it was a bit of a rocky start there with the Gems. But you know what? There was nothing more classic minor league sports than that, I don't think. And boy, we sure had a good laugh when we got that letter that says they weren't going to sue the team. Whew, boy, that was we had a good chuckle. What a stupid idea that was. Let's think of something else. Yep. And then we just got back to work. But it wasn't, it wasn't for lack of trying. We tried to think of zany, off the wall stuff. And a lot of it, I think, was pretty cool. I had the idea when I came in. Hera didn't have any video capability. Mm-hmm. And when I came in, because growing up around here playing hockey, I grew up playing at Hera. I'd go to Bombers games at Hera, and you'd see those two big dot matrix boards on either side, flash messages and stuff. So I'm like, at least we have that to play with. I'm thinking as a, marketing, PR, broadcast guy. I come in, nope, those don't work anymore. So we have no capacity to flash any kind of crowd messaging at all, which even in 2011, at a professional sporting event, you need something. You do. Right. And so that, I think within a week, I had ordered, secured, and was having the arena install the video screen and the projector. And we did that in pretty short order before the first game so that we would have something. If nothing from just a fan involvement interaction. So, I mean, they were open to trying a lot of things and trying to overcome what limitations that we had.
What were some of your favorite venues to go in the IHL 2.0 and the CHL?
Oh, it was so different. Each league was different. The ECHL at the time when I was in it, the late 2000s, it was still a lot of the smaller buildings. Toledo Sports Arena, it's not there anymore. It was as old a building as you can get. Mm-hmm. And it was certainly not in good shape at the time. And when you would walk in, it had an old-time hockey feel. It felt like Slapshot. It smelled like a Zamboni exhaust, stale popcorn, and urine. But it felt like old-time hockey, right?
Right.
And maybe that's what old-time hockey smells like. I don't know. I'm too young for that. But rinks like that. It was Johnstown with the Chiefs. I loved going to Johnstown. By far one of my favorite rinks ever. And only for the fact that there's a lot of nostalgia there.
Yeah.
It is literally Slapshot. It is where they filmed the movie Slapshot. And miraculously, even though they've updated the building, it still looks like it did in the movie Slapshot.
It's just too bad they don't have a team anymore.
Well, they've got a team in the North American League.
Oh, that's right.
They do. But what was amazing about Johnstown to me was the visitor radio broadcast booth was the broadcast booth up in the gondola that they used for Jim Carr's booth in the movie. So the famous scenes of Jim Carr screaming at his microphone and of, falling down the stairs and, all of that was filmed. That is the modern day visitors radio booth. And it looks exactly the same as it did in the movie. So getting to call some games from Jim Carr's booth was a pretty big feather in a young broadcaster's cap.
Let's move on to the Troy Bruins 2.0. You were the president of operations, or president of the organization, rather, excuse me. And like I mentioned earlier, you were my boss the All-American Hockey League year. What was it like bringing the Bruins to Hobart Arena?
Oh, it was stressful. It was stressful. It was, it was an effort. You talk history, you talk nostalgia. There was an effort. It was meant to be a development program. It was meant to be a junior team, and that's really what it was made for. It was designed for that. Unfortunately, it was also during the recession. Mm-hmm. That played into it. The team was created in 2009. So that was a big factor, I think, right from the get-go. The fact that leagues were consolidating, changing because of the economic conditions of the country at that time, because hockey is seen as more affluent in terms of sport, how expensive hockey can be to participate in, dwindles your numbers of participation anytime there's usually a recession, which is also something we're watching right now.
Yeah, it's
a lot of factors go into it. The first season was as a junior team, had some success. the league folds. And that's the thing that a lot of people, unless they've been in the industry of professional minor league sports, may not have as big an awareness of. And I say it like this because I get the question often still, what happened? Well, why did the team go away? Well, look at it this way. If we started a restaurant, the restaurant doesn't have to depend on 9 other restaurants to stay in business. The restaurant can just do its thing, make the best meals, do the best marketing, it fills its tables, and it's fine. Whereas in professional sports, you could do all of those things. Your restaurant could be doing absolutely fantastic business, but if the other 9 restaurants you depend on don't have the same level of success, it doesn't matter. And so that's a real struggle for a lot of organizations that, sometimes you could do everything right and still struggle. And ultimately, I think that's the story that we had here.
And then the second year, that was the All-American Hockey League year. What was that like?
That was, I really think that was a grasp to keep hockey going, to keep hockey in Troy. At that time, the Bombers had left. The Gems were still playing in their IHL 2.0. There were news headlines at the time that the Gems were going to fold. They didn't have funding. The league was on the verge of collapsing. So really, both teams were facing the same uncertain future. It certainly looked around 2010 that there wasn't going to be any hockey in Dayton in any of the arenas. So, the Gems ultimately found Kathy Rupp, and that's kind of the direction that hockey took moving forward. Which that's the business, they say.
Can you ever see a hockey team, professional or juniors, return to Hobart?
No. And I'll say this. When it comes to Hobart, it's a wonderful facility. Mm-hmm. And the money the city has put into the building on the back end, I think Hobart Arena itself is nicer in terms of behind-the-scenes facilities for dressing facilities, banquet rooms, offices. The back-of-the-house stuff is better at Hobart Arena now in Troy than most of the professional arenas I've ever been in.
Yeah, City of Troy really takes care of Hobart, and it's always one of my favorite rinks to go to during the hockey season. It's, when you go inside, if you're looking at outside, you can't tell that it was the first hockey rink built in the 50s.
It's beautiful, and it's beautiful, and it has a tremendous amount of history. At such a high level of the game. So many players came through Troy that went on to play in the National Hockey League in the 50s that they're still on the wall. But the reality of the market is different. The Bruins at the time were able to put people in the stands in the 50s. There were 3 channels on TV. Economics were a little different at the time. Troy had the Hobart Brother Corporation, had Hobart Manufacturing, had all of these companies. Employment was huge. It was a different time, to the point now where to put a team in Hobart that would require surviving on gate receipts and marketing. The corporate dollars just aren't available in Troy. They're not. The corporate dollars won't reach this far north, and I think that's a struggle people have. To operate a minor professional hockey team right now, you have to spend at least $1 million. which is why some of these semi-pro leagues like the FHL are so attractive to certain individuals, because it doesn't require the investment that a fully professional league does. So right off the bat, how do you justify the expense in the operating budget when you have a reduced capacity to obtain corporate advertising dollars? Gate is tough because you have a max capacity of 3,786 in the arena, how many seats you have. On top of that, there's no premium seating options. So there's no suites, there's no clubhouse, there's no there's nothing that you can upcharge for. It's all general admission seating. Seating obstructions are another issue. It has the old beams that obstruct a couple hundred of those 3,786 seats. So that's a concern right there. And then the biggest issue, I think, is just the distance from the city center core, whereas Troy, Ohio is a good 45 minutes, maybe more depending on traffic, from where a lot of the money in the Dayton market is right now. You think, where are the people with the disposable income? Yeah, there's some in Troy, there's some in Miami County, there's certainly some north, but a large percentage of the 1 million people in the Miami Valley are a fairly decent car drive away from Troy, and that is a bit of an issue when you're competing for entertainment dollars in such a saturated market. And so I think all of those things right there work against having a team in Troy, and I think the Bombers learned that firsthand, because I know that was a serious consideration at one point to keep the Bombers around, is to relocate to Troy until they could figure out an arena situation. So it's been considered, and it just nobody's ever pulled the trigger for one reason than another, and that's without even discussing the Dragons effect. And this is something I talked about at length with the Gems when I was with the Gems, that ever since the Dragons came into the market in 2000, it completely changed the perception of the average consumer, let's say sports attendee, completely changed the perception on what a minor league sporting experience is, at least in the Dayton market. So you come in with a brand new facility, it's clean, it's professional, it's well lit, it's organized, you have this high gloss presentation, the video board, there's a million different things for everybody to enjoy, and it's an experience unlike anybody had ever had before in the Dayton market. And so that completely taints the perception of people that then from then on go to a sporting event in Dayton. Ask anyone at UD. All of the whiz-bang stuff they do, video board, scoreboard stuff in halftime, that is stuff they have to do because there's an expectation for it. And minor league hockey in Dayton and Troy cannot compete at that level without seeming like a little bit of a lesser product. And we ran into that big time at Hera. Hera, compared to the same family, can go to a Dragons game for the same amount of money, probably a little bit more money actually, can go to a Gems game at Hera and have a completely different experience. And that's just the reality of the market. That's the business side of hockey in Dayton. That's it right there.
Something I don't want to say never thought of, but those are solid points, and it does make me sad, and I hope that there's a chance for a new arena in the Dayton area, but we'll see.
Well, I will say this. Nobody wants to see it succeed more than me, for obvious reasons that we've talked about today. In order for it to succeed, hockey needs to be away for a little bit longer.
Okay.
The market needs to cool. The market needs to reset. Probably whatever kind of impending economic situation our country's headed towards now needs to resolve itself long before anybody thinks about putting a new ice pad in Dayton. because in order for it to succeed, you now have to meet or exceed the standard that's been set now by the Dragons. That's a new building. That's a quality, fully professional, bonded league. And that is a top-level funded professional organization from top to bottom that is going to cost them serious money to pull off. And anything less than that will never succeed.
It's a solid point. You got to put in a very, very shiny penny if you want to see it succeed here in Dayton.
And that's just it. And with all the upgrades to UD Arena, that just takes the bar even further now. That somebody, if I take my family to a sporting event, I expect a certain level of professionalism, a certain level on facilities, and a certain level of entertainment value for those dollars, whether it's a mid-level college basketball game, whether it's a single-A wooden bat baseball game, it doesn't matter. The expectations are there now. And hockey already struggles in some regards in perception in the Dayton market, will have to meet or exceed that to be taken considerably seriously.
Now, JT, is there any other sport that you never got to call that you'd like to one day?
Done a lot of sports. I when I was younger, I had the opportunity to just do as many as I wanted and really try and figure out what I liked. And really, I think I've done all of the ones that I would want to do.
I mean, that's a lot of
maybe
sports.
water polo. That could be fun.
Water polo's cool.
I'd like to learn how to describe how somebody is trying to drown their opponent. I think that would be humorous. I would like to learn some vernacular for that.
It's like I was going to call it water ball, but it's volleyball in water. So there's a couple high schools in Cincinnati that have it. I think Princeton and Mason are two that I know right off the bat. But yeah, that's one sport I'd like to do one day too. So now, what's cool about you, JT, is you have your own local business. What's it like owning Szabo Entertainment?
It's awful lonely lately, Lee. We're shifting gears from optimistic sports chat on the business of hockey to now sadness at the hands of the coronavirus. Yeah. But no, it's exactly what you think. The last couple of years, I've been fortunate enough to be a stay-at-home dad to our kids, which is really important to me to be able to do. And without going crazy, I was able to, start my own entertainment live event and DJ business. Just going back to the old school days of being the AV geek, I suppose. So a lot of weddings and school dances and community events and fundraisers, stuff like that. Just getting out and being with people and playing some music and being in front of the microphone, acting goofy and just having fun. And then the lockdown hit, and then the virus hit. And now all of a sudden we're seeing some real significant paradigm shifts in how people are getting together and how they're celebrating things. And it's really, I'll be honest, it's completely wiped out my business at this point, to the point where, even people that are having weddings, it's changing behaviors now. So, and long story short, I started to see some changes to the industry just in the last couple of years. A lot of people are just deciding that, hey, this technology allows us to do it ourselves. Brides and grooms are now creating their own Spotify playlists with all of their guests and playing that at weddings now. Most weddings that I've done in the last 2 years, people aren't doing the traditional stuff. They're not doing garter tosses. They're not doing bouquet tosses. They're not doing all of this stuff. So more and more of the younger couples are opting, well, let's get a couple speakers and we'll set up Spotify and we'll just we'll just hang out with family and friends. So that's changing my business now. So how do I adapt to that? And the last couple of weeks has been kind of a business challenge, and I like that, on figuring out where to go from here.
Let's talk more positively. How about some of your favorite things about sports locally?
Haven't watched a whole lot lately. I don't know. I'm at the point now where I look at reports and articles on, the National Hockey League trying to save their season, NBA trying to play at Disney World, and I'm thinking, it's just no. I mean, nobody wants to watch hockey more than me, but at a certain point, you need to cut your losses. And I think what this whole last couple months has taught us is that, we've been through so much, and there's so much up against these leagues that I really think, from both a fan perspective and a business perspective, let's take a timeout. We've already done that. Let's make sure everybody's healthy, which it seems like everybody is in these leagues, and let's really plan for the first time. And we have a tremendous opportunity, and I don't know why I say we. Sports leagues across the world have a tremendous opportunity that I don't think most of them have ever had, and that is time. And there's so much logistics that go into running these leagues, even minor leagues, that to have an extra couple months where you can really sit down and figuring out how can we provide the best product on the field, on the ice? How can we enhance our rules to make the game safer? How can we figure out how we can partner with our communities better and have the time to actually go out and do it and not have to be focused on putting on a show? And I think the real emphasis is in the wrong place. Everybody just wants to hurry up and get back to the status quo, when I think we have a real responsibility and an opportunity here that only comes around once in a lifetime to really stop, pause, and contemplate and make our sports better, make our sports safer, and make them a better value for the fans. And that's what I'm just not seeing right now.
Tag teaming into that thought, what would you like to see in the future of Dayton sports and media?
Hockey, honestly. And I don't mean professional hockey specifically. I think the growth of amateur hockey is something that needs to happen. I think the growth of high school hockey is something that needs to happen. I'd love to see the University of Dayton get a varsity hockey team. Why not? I'd love to see the sport grow in importance again to the level that it hasn't been in quite some time. I'd also like to see more cohesiveness between the sports organizations. I think Dayton and Cincinnati particularly has a rich sports history that I think could be leveraged better, either by some media platforms or something. But I mean, most people are getting their local sports coverage from just a handful of outlets. There's really no major broadcast of any local sports that you can find on TV. Everything either comes from Major League Cincinnati or Columbus. And I think there's a lot of opportunity out there for just the right thing.
I totally agree on that, and also hockey too. What high schools would you like to see add hockey? Because Hobart Arena is really used by Troy, and I know there's not a lot of big school districts in Miami County, but you think there's got to be one or two teams that could possibly make a nice run at ice hockey.
There's really, in Miami County, Troy's the only one that's viable, I think. And ultimately it comes to where are you getting your player talent pool, which is different for hockey than other sports. Every town has basketball courts. Every town has ball fields. Every town has soccer fields. Every school has a gym. And so basketball, baseball, and football, and soccer, I'll include soccer in that, are ubiquitous. And by that I mean every town, every school has a talent supply. There are kids in every town, every neighborhood that are kicking soccer balls, that are shooting free throws, that are throwing spirals. And so schools can just tap into that potential, that pipeline. Whereas with hockey, how many ice rinks are in Dayton, Lee?
There's South Metro, there's Kettering, there's Hobart, there's
That's it.
Springfield.
In Springfield. I'm sorry, Springfield. So 4.
Yeah, that's it.
Four. How many high schools are there in the Miami Valley, Lee?
How many high schools in the Miami Valley? A lot more than I can count.
Exactly.
I can tell
exactly.
you.
No. I don't need a number. That was the point. So the talent pool. Okay. Now I'm not saying that all the kids that play hockey in Troy are from Troy. They're not. There's players from all over. But in order to tap into that talent supply, you need to have a well, and occasionally people come from all over to that well to drink from that sport, and that's what ice rinks are in the Miami Valley. A lot of those players, if they want to play at a high school varsity level, a real varsity level, will transfer to Troy. Or we've had multiple families move to Troy specifically to play varsity hockey. And so that's the difference. And the people that don't feel comfortable transferring or don't want to move schools, there are travel options. There's the Stealth. They offer a midget team that they call a high school team, which is great for kids that can't really play real varsity. It gives them something. But there's only so many places that can support a program, because then you still need to be somewhat close to your school for fan support, for sponsorship dollars, for logistics, for busing. So it's not like someone from Germantown could set up shop and play in Troy. They're just logistically could not work. So that's a real challenge, is just available ice time, which is why we see an explosion in Columbus, because now I think they're up to 13, 14 ice rinks in Columbus now.
Something like that. They have close to 20 high school teams up there, not counting
exactly
youth hockey.
So that's a real challenge here in this area.
Can you believe that it's better in Dayton than Cincinnati, just because Cincinnati has 3 sheets of ice, not counting Heritage Bank? I was going to call it Hickory Bank. What's wrong with me? But,
I kind of like Hickory Bank, actually.
Bank.
The Coliseum. We'll just call it the Coliseum.
The
Fun fact, my very first concert ever was at the Riverfront Coliseum. It was Garth Brooks.
Garth Brooks.
And that's before the Cyclones bought it and converted it. So it still had the old multicolored seats. And oh, yeah, that's before they put in the clock. Yeah, that was my first time in that building. Glorious.
Just 3 sheets of ice in Cincinnati, though. That's heartbreaking. And I know the Gardens didn't help.
I had a guy tell me once. He's Canadian, so he's trustworthy, right?
Yeah.
So he told me once. He said, "Listen, guy." That's how we talked. He said, "Listen, guy. Ice rinks don't make money. At least they don't down here." And so that's a guiding principle. They don't make money. So it's hard to justify unless it's a municipality or someone that just has an abundance of love and a lacking of financial understanding that they're supposed to just operate these buildings. I mean, an electric bill could be over $30,000 a month for one ice rink. I mean, it's substantial. So there's a lot of things. So we're just very fortunate for the facilities that we do currently have.
What was I going to say? Oh, I have to pay for water, and I have to pay for it because it's frozen. JT, how can people follow you and your work on social media?
Well, right now, Szabo Entertainment has a Facebook page and an Instagram page. You can just search for Szabo, SZABO Media or Entertainment, and it will pop up. In the process now of creating some personally branded stuff, as I kind of look at some options on where the entertainment business goes. So there may be some personal stuff here coming in the next couple weeks, but it's just everything's still so far up in the air right now. I just I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you and provide some, I hope, interesting insight and some stories to your listeners.
JT, if I didn't think it was going to be interesting, I wouldn't have invited you on.
Well, I appreciate it, Lee.
It was a lot of fun talking hockey, JT, and let's do it sometime soon. And hopefully we have a hockey season in 2020, 2021.
Fingers crossed.
Fingers crossed. And that will do it. That is episode 158 of the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast. And we'll talk to you again for episode 159.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast with Lee W. Mowen. To subscribe to the podcast, please visit theleewmowen.com/podcast. From there, you can choose your favorite platform, such as Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, TuneIn, Spotify, the iHeartRadio app, and many more. Interact with the podcast and host on Twitter at the Lee W. Mowen and at CinDayPod. Like the Facebook page, the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast, and download the free Flick Chat app, then search for the local Cinday Sports Group to submit your future Mowen's Mailbag questions. The closing theme is Lights Go Down by Dan Hennig, provided by the YouTube Music Library Collection. This is Lee W. Mowen, and I hope you enjoyed this week's podcast. Please join me again next week on the Cincinnati and Dayton Sports Podcast.